It's a new day on DS9 and Sisko is preparing dinner. Almost getting smeared across space in the last episode hasn't ruined his appetite, and it hasn't stopped Jake trying to set his dad up with a date, either. The freighter captain he mentioned previously is called Cassidy Yates, and Jake already wants them to jump to dinner. Sisko instead tells him he'll handle things his own way, and Jake lets it go, for now. To Quark's we go, and he's having an unpleasant time of things. Not only is Eggnog not at work, instead studying to join Starfleet and destroy Ferengi culture in the process, but Quark's also got a visitor. Brunt is an official of the Ferengi Commerce Authority, which basically makes him the money police, and Rom closes the bar while Quark tries to figure out what he's done. This is Ferengi culture, so learning the problem takes a number of, let's call them administration fees, and Quark eventually discovers the cause is his mother. Ishka has been earning profit, which is against the law for Ferengi women. That means a trip back to Ferenginar to make her confess her crimes and accomplices, whether she wants to or not. And Rom's decided he's coming too, him apparently having a stronger bond with her than Quark from the sounds of things. Brunt's along for the ride too, it seems, presumably to make sure this outrage is taken care of. What he finds is a female wearing clothes, and one who has the audacity to talk to him as well. Such obscenity is too much even for a member of the money police. He leaves with a threat to sell her into slavery if she's not confessed in 3 days, and, even worse, make Quark pay for her crimes out of his own pocket. The departure of Quark has had unintended consequences, the most curious of which being Odo getting involved in a little breaking and entering. Bashir and O'Brien want their dartboard back, and replicating another wouldn't be the same. Sisko's a little curious when he finds them, but isn't bothered enough to interfere and moves to leave. They all assume it's because he'll be off to a cargo bay to meet this freighter captain that Jake's been talking about, something Dax mentioned to him earlier as well. It would appear that everybody else is more informed on Sisko's love life than he is. Back to Ferenginar we go, and Rom is laying the table. Such jobs should be reserved for their mother, says Quark, and it's clearly an attitude Ishka has always had based on their childhood and how he thinks it affected their father. It becomes an argument over dinner, her refusing to confess to earning profit. It's a relatively small amount, thinks Rom, just 3 bars of latinum, but that's a comment which has Quark arguing the principle is what matters, and such things underpin the entirety of Ferengi society. The families of those who ignore them are shunned, quite rightly, and those who bring such shame upon their loved ones are selfish. Rom's willing to hear Ishka's side of the story even if Quark isn't, and she offers to disrobe while she tells it to make him feel more comfortable. It's not about the money, as she doesn't need it, Quark being generous with keeping her comfortable. It's about archaic traditions and her wanting to prove they're pure bullshit. A confession of guilt would be a confession that she was wrong, and what's wrong is the system. Speaking of wrong, Cassidy Yates is having a pop at one of her crew for carrying cargo crates onto her ship manually instead of using an anti-grav lifter. You know, those things we had a whole story about being fundamentally incompatible with the design of Deep Space Nine before abandoning it when it became narratively inconvenient. Sisko, who's finally called in for a gander, asks why she's not just teleporting them. The answer is because it would need a teleporter of better quality than the clapped-out piece of shit she's got. Then she recognizes who she's talking to based on the rank pips, or perhaps pretends to. Sisko apologizes for Jake's over-eager approach before Cassidy is called away by the sound of something falling over. An offer to help from Sisko is declined, but she does invite him for a coffee the following evening. Maybe Jake knows what he's doing after all. Rom and Quark have spent the night in their old family home, though Quark didn't do much sleeping by the looks of things. He's been busy investigating his mother's financial affairs, and it's a metric fuckton more than the 3 bars of latinum he was told. In fact, it's more than Quark's worth, which means he'll be ruined if she doesn't confess. The inevitable shouting match has some pretty unpleasant components, like saying Quark is jealous of her success, all the more unpleasant for them likely being true. It was the same with their father, a man who refused to listen to her for the same reasons Quark won't now, and who was a financial failure as a result. Quark's so upset by the confrontation that he says he's going to the FCA to let them deal with it all, and Rom adding that Ishka is likely right about their dad probably doesn't help. They have a bit of a wrestle before Ishka breaks it up and tells Rom to let Quark do as he pleases, and off he goes to see Brunt. The office he works in is 40 levels up a tower, and using the lift costs money, so Quark's knackered when he finally makes it and asks to see Brunt. Rom arrives while Quark is waiting, having chased him here. He has a message from their mother, and it's far more important than a simple apology. It's an offer to share her profits. Quark might be upset, but he's still a Ferengi. The problem is that Rom is also a Ferengi, and he lied about their mother sharing her profits. To be fair, he also lied to Ishka and said he could convince Quark to let her keep all of it. He's had enough of their shit and wants them to hammer out a deal, if only to stop the FCA from getting all of the money. That's enough to make both of them listen, and he leads them to it. They start with a little bickering about Rom, Quark saying she's too soft on him. She basically admits as much and says it's because Rom's like their father, not cut out for Ferengi business. Unlike Quark, who inherited his business sense from her. It was her who taught him the rules of acquisition after all. Rom can recite them too, of course, but he's just making noise. Quark can see the idea behind the words, not just the rule, but the philosophy of it too, just like she can. It's something his father never had, but she didn't hold that against him. He was still a good husband and father, just as Quark and Rom are both good sons, simply in their own ways. The breakthrough is enough to make her offer to repay the money and confess, news that Quark welcomes fully, both for his mother and his bank balance. Coffee between Sisko and Cassidy isn't going well. At least that's what Sisko thinks when she's distracted, but the reason is she forgot that she'd already had something arranged when she invited him. Her brother's a colonist so far away that it takes a couple of weeks for transmissions to arrive, and there's one coming in tonight. Specifically, it's an audio recording of a game they've started playing on his colony, an ancient sport called baseball that not many people have heard of these days, and I wonder if Jake deliberately left that particular detail out so they could discover it for themselves. The effect is suitably predictable when she hears Sisko's a baseball fan too, and she invites him to listen to it with her as a matchmaker of potentially impressive skills watches them leave together. And leave is what Brunt's about to do at Quark's childhood home. A suitably nude Ishka has put her print onto a confession, and a little bag of latinum from Quark convinces Brunt that making this whole affair public knowledge could cause other females to get problematic ideas into their heads. With that done, Quark leaves to reopen the bar, though does so on much better terms with his mother. Rom stays behind to say goodbye himself, and to deliver this episode's punchline, which is, of course, that the money she handed over was only a third of what she earned. We'll leave Rom to catch up to his brother, and Ishka to continue being the true Ferengi of the family, until the next adventure. Before we start the analysis proper, let's have a little chat about a wardrobe choice made in this episode. Brunt, FCA, is an important figure from the Money Police, and a symbol of that status, like the bar of gold-pressed latinum around his neck, makes sense. The thing is, a lot of people don't realize just how heavy gold is, weighing almost twice as much per cubic centimeter in its pure form as lead. I worked for a brief stint in a plumber's merchant in my youth, and can tell you from personal experience that moving rolls of lead sheet is not all shits and giggles. Based on the size of the bar of latinum, something we know from props being sold after the show ended, even the lowest grade of 8-carat gold would have weighed nearly a kilogram. You can basically double that if it's pure, and as gold can be replicated, it likely is. The negligible latinum content is unlikely to have changed those measurements much, something we learn from a certain Morn-focused episode later on. All of which is to say, that's one bloody heavy necklace Brunt is wearing. For the sake of future appearances, we're going to assume that, based on the importance of the role, there might be an anti-gravity generator inside it or something. One that works with Deep Space Nine's architecture, because that's allowed now. To the bulk of it then, and we learn a few more snippets about Ferengi culture in this one. We've the first mention of the Ferengi Commerce Authority, for example, something that would need to exist to ensure everybody plays by the rules, or at least cuts them in on the profit when they don't. The organisation adds some pleasing little details too, such as Brunt's office being 40 stories up. It's a fun little twist on an idea from our world of higher offices having more prestige. In the Ferengi's case, it increases the chance of visitors paying to use the lift, a cut of which likely goes to whoever's based there. It serves no purpose other than to add flavour, and is excellent because of it. Somebody had fun with this episode. That extends to other things too, like fees being payable to be told what you're accused of, or a charge for sitting when you're waiting for an appointment. It's an unholy wedding of capitalism and bureaucracy taken to their extremes, and fun for anybody not living in it. We're given a similar bit of flavour at the entrance to Ishka's home, a fee payable by guests for access, and a reminder that no contract has been entered into for the use of contents therein. Such agreements being repeated as mantras also serve a more practical use, to remind the viewers that Ferengi treat commerce with reverence, the religious aspects serving to cement such things into their culture. It's an astute observation of how performative repetition can normalize anything if you give it enough time, the original purpose now shrouded in ceremonial mummery. As I said before, somebody had fun with this. The bulk of the story is another dip into something we've touched upon before, the treatment of Ferengi women. We had a plot dedicated to this in Season 2, Rules of Acquisition, where a Ferengi woman proved herself every bit the equal of Quark, and hoodwinked Grand Nagus Zek himself too. This story is much the same, Ishka showing us that Ferengi women have been finding ways to break those cultural taboos for some time, despite the risks. Her unwillingness to fit into cultural norms is something she's always had, if mentions of Quark and Rom's childhoods are an indication, which raises the question of just how many other unusual families are out there. The inevitable ding-dong between current Ferengi society and progress draws ever closer. It's a useful episode for Quark, too, showing us his home life before he left was not great. You could argue this makes him qualify for the Deep Space Nine shit parent support group, as it's clear Ishka's treatment of Rom over him is a wound he's carried all his life. That he'll be sitting right next to Odo in that club is perhaps the topic for a whole analysis all of its own. We also learn that, despite this treatment, Quark has always been generous with the money he sent home to Ishka. That ties into something we've said before on here, that Quark is defensive of the people he chooses, regardless of the personal cost. He's tried to defend Odo a couple of times, if you recall, and again, there's probably a whole discussion to be had there about why Quark and Odo both formed a connection with someone who is often adversarial, based on the things we've learned about their childhoods. Let's end with the introduction of Cassidy Yates, shall we? There's a small exchange between her and Sisko in this one that I think is well written. When she hears a container falling over and Sisko offers to lend a hand, she says she can take care of it, and Sisko accepts this. With 3 lines, we've established that Cassidy is someone who prefers to be independent where possible, and also shown that Sisko knows when to back off. That's some good work all on its own, but there's potentially more to it as well. Was that possibly a test by her to see how he'd react, perhaps expecting him to be a take-control kind of person given his job? Her then inviting him for coffee suggests she likes to set her own terms. It's a well-handled introduction that sets Cassidy up as more than just an accessory for Sisko without falling into nonsense like the Ice Queen trope, and will give some well-deserved points to whoever wrote it that way. End of episode.
You know, I think I'm actually starting to like this old incel.
We've certainly spent enough time in it, though I feel like we probably should have seen this one coming.
To be fair, we had no way of knowing Major Kira volunteered at the Bajoran Central Archives during her time off.
No, but carrying on with the lie after we recognized her was our fault.
Nah, trust me, mate, the only thing you can do in circumstances like that is bluff your way out.
Perhaps, but I think trying to convince her we were the prophets, and the safety of Bajor relied on her giving us the footage, was laying it on a bit thick. Woof.